Now, some people say that yes, it's understandable, but it's actually poetry. You look at some of the structure in some of the verses, and they say, well, this is really poetry. So maybe we should look at that. There's a gentleman, Dr. Boyd, who was a mathematician, who wanted to see if he could address this issue from an objective mathematical perspective. So he undertook a statistical analysis of the Hebrew language structure. And in particular, he analyzed or determined the ratio of preterites to total finite verbs. Now, that doesn't really mean anything to me, so I hope you don't ask me a question about that, but it did mean something to him, and he was able to extract this from the language. And he selected passages of historical narrative and poetry about which no one has any dispute. Okay, like Chronicles, everybody agrees that's history, right? And he determined this ratio. And based on this ratio for these two types of language, he developed a decision rule. That is, if I measure this particular parameter and it's this value, it'll be poetry. If it's this value, it'll be historical narrative. Then he tested this decision rule using some other parts of the Bible about which no one has any dispute, and saw how it worked. And since it worked pretty well, he then expanded his analysis and looked at a whole bunch of other areas. And here's what he found. Okay, so plot of the probability of the text being narrative, going from 0 to 1 or 100%, against this ratio of preterites to total finite verbs. And you can see there's a very clear demarcation line. If the value of that ratio is less than that pink line, it's classified as poetry, and if it's higher than that, it's classified as narrative. Now, if you were to use a discontinuous decision rule like that, there would only be two misclassifications. But of course, Dr. Boyd, being a mathematician, he likes a nice equation to use, so he fit these data to an equation, and that's the curved line. Then when he analyzed Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 2, verse 3, here is the result. And if you use his equation to calculate the associated probability, it says that the creation account in Genesis is 99.9964% probably historical narrative. Well, if you round that up, it's 100% historical narrative. Doesn't leave a lot of doubt. And all of this leads this gentleman, who you can see is a professor of Hebrew at Oxford University, or was, to remark the following. He says, so far as I know, there is no professor of Hebrew or Old Testament at any world-class university who does not believe that the writers of Genesis intended to convey to their readers the idea that creation took place in a series of 6 days, which were the same as the days of 24 hours we now experience. The figures contained in Genesis genealogies provide, by simple addition, a chronology from the beginning of the world up to the latter stages in the biblical story, and that Noah's flood was understood to be worldwide and extinguished all human and animal life except for those in the ark. Now, that's his opinion of what the language actually says and was meant to say. He asserts that biblical Hebrew language professors all around the world have that same perspective.